So in this video, I'll go over some examples related to buying on margin. Okay. First, let's take a look at example 1. So in this example, we assume that I have $1,000 in my brokerage account, and I also borrow $1,000, so I can buy 100 shares of GE at $20 per share. Okay. And also, suppose that after I made my purchase, GE share price went up to $25 per share. Okay, so now let's consider my positions. The first question is, what are my initial equity and debt? The equity here refers to the amount of money that I bring into the trade. So that's my own money, right? So in this case, according to the description here, I brought in $1,000. That's my own money, so that's my equity, right? So my debt is my borrowed money, so that's also $1,000. So I bring in $1,000 and borrow $1,000. My equity is equal to $1,000, and my debt is also equal to $1,000. These are at the beginning. Okay. What is GE stock return? So we should know how to calculate stock return. That's $25 ending price minus beginning price divided by beginning price. So that's 5/20. That's a quarter, or 25%. Okay, so GE stock return is 25%. Next question is, what is the dollar profit or loss on this trade? So in this trade, I bought 100 shares of GE, and each share went up by $5. So my total profit would be, I'll write this on this side, 100 shares of GE times $25 minus $20. So that's a $5 gain on each share multiplied by 100 shares. So my total profit from the trade is $500. Okay. The fourth question, what are my equity and debt when the stock price of GE is $25 per share? So when we trade on margin, in other words, when we borrow money to trade, okay, we bear all the losses and the gains. Okay, so if we make money from the trade, that's our gain. If we lose money from the trade, that's our loss, right? The creditor doesn't really bear any gain or loss. In this case, the $500 gain is all mine, right? Therefore, after I make $500 from the trade, my equity went up by $500. Therefore, my new equity is $1,500. Okay. So remember, all the losses and gains are with the trader, are borne by the trader, not by the creditor. Okay. So in this case, my new equity is $1,500, and my debt doesn't change. How much has my equity changed in dollar term? Well, my equity went up by $500, and in percentage term, because my gain in equity is $500, my initial equity is $1,000. Therefore, the percentage gain on my own equity is 50%. Okay, so that's a 50% gain on my own equity. Because I borrowed money to buy the stock, so when the stock price goes up by 25%, the gain on my own money is 50%. So margin trade amplified the gain on the stock. Okay. Let's have a look at example 2. So this example is similar to example 1. The only difference here is that instead of having a stock price increase, here we have a stock price decrease. Right? So you bought GE stock at $20 per share. Now the stock price is $16 per share. Everything else is the same as the first example. What's GE stock return? We know that it's ending price minus beginning price divided by beginning price. that's a negative 20% return on GE stock. What's the dollar profit or loss on the trade? Like I said before, when we borrow money to trade, all the losses and gains are on us. So in this case, it's a loss, so that's all on us. 100 shares times a $4 loss per share, so that's a loss of $400. And what are my debt and equity when the stock price drops to $16 a share? And because I lost $400, so my new equity is initial equity subtract the loss. So now my equity is $600. My debt doesn't change. I still have to pay back $1,000. What is the change in my equity in dollar term and in percentage term? Well, in dollar term, I lost $400, so that's the change in my equity. It decreased by $400. In percentage term, 400 loss divided by my initial equity, which is $1,000, so that's a negative 40% change in my equity. So again, the stock price just dropped 20%, but because I used margin to trade, the return on my own money is actually negative 40%, so I doubled the loss here. In the previous case, in example 1, I doubled the gain. In this case, I doubled the loss. Right? Now let's take a look at example 3. So in example 3, the stock return is the same as in example 2. GE stock went from $20 per share to $16 per share. Right? But the difference here is assume that I borrowed more money than before. Remember, in the previous 2 cases, I contributed $1,000 of my own money, and then I borrowed $1,000 from my broker. But in example 3, I brought in $1,000, that's my own money, but I borrowed $4,000. Okay, so I borrowed a lot more money because now I have a total of $5,000, so I can buy more shares. So I bought 250 shares of GE stock. Well, let's see what's the effect here. GE stock return, so we did this in the previous example, that's 16 minus 20 divided by 20, that's 20%. So that's a 20% loss. What is the dollar profit or loss on the trade? In this case, because we borrowed a lot more money, so we bought more shares. So now we hold 250 shares, and on each share we lose $4. So that's a loss of $1,000. And what are my equity and debt when the stock price is $16? Well, my initial equity is $1,000, so I brought in $1,000, and through this trade I lost $1,000. So my new equity is 0. Okay. I still have to pay back the $4,000 debt. Okay. Because I borrowed $4,000, I still have to pay it back. Okay. So after the stock price change, I have no equity left, meaning I have none of my own money left, and I still owe $4,000 to my broker. How much has my equity changed in dollar term and in percentage term? Well, in dollar term, I lost $1,000. In percentage term, that's my loss over my initial equity, so that's negative 100% because I lost all my equity, so that's 100% loss on my equity. So in this example, compared to example 2, right? In example 2, we borrowed $1,000. So when the stock price was negative 20%, we doubled the loss. We lost 40% on our own money. In this example though, because we borrowed much more money, right? So for the same loss on the stock, we actually lost much more of our own money. So that's again the risk of borrowing money to trade. The more you borrow, the higher the risk you bear. Okay, let's take a look at example 4. In this example, we assume that we have $1,000 of our own money and we borrow $1,000 to buy 100 shares GE at $20 per share. And after we made our purchase, the stock price of GE dropped to $16 per share. So that's 1 year after our purchase. The other assumption we make is that our broker charges an annual interest rate of 3% on the loan. Okay, so for the borrowed money here, we have to pay 3% per year. The first question is, what is my dollar profit and loss on the trade? So that's 100 shares times $16 minus 20. So this is my loss on the trade. And on top of that, remember, I also have to pay interest, right? Therefore, through that interest, I lose $1,000, which is my debt, multiplied by interest rate. My loss has two components. One is because the stock price went down, so I lose money on the stock. Okay. I bought 100 shares and lose $4 on each share, so that's a $400 loss. And on top of that, because my broker charges an interest, so I do have to pay a 3% interest on the $1,000 I borrowed. Therefore, the total is the loss on the stock and the loss on the interest. So total loss of $430. What are my equity and debt when the stock price is $16? So when the stock price dropped to $16, my equity, based on our calculation of question 1, my equity is reduced by 430, so I have 570 left. Okay. My debt is still, I still have to pay back $1,000, so my debt is still $1,000. And what is my margin when the price is $16? So before I answer this question, let's first review the concept of margin we use here. For margin, our definition is that our margin is equal to our equity divided by the value of our holdings. So at the beginning of the trade, let's see what's the margin. When we initiated our trade, our equity is $1,000, and we bought 100 shares at $20 per share, so denominator here is $2,000. Therefore, our initial margin is 50%. Okay, so at the beginning of the trade, our margin is 50%. When the stock price is $16, what's our new margin? I'm going to write the answer here. When the stock price is $16, our new equity is 570, according to our calculation here for the previous question, right? So our new equity is 570. What is the value of our holding? Well, the value of our holding is 100 shares times $16 per share. Therefore, our margin is 570 divided by 1600. If you carry out this calculation, you'll see that our new margin is 35.6%.